Welcome to this edition of Tech Trends. The COVID-19 pandemic has once more brought to the fore the issue of bridging the digital divide and ensuring that high-speed broadband is available and affordable for all. My guest on the show is an industry player, and she shares her thoughts on the way forward. That's on the interview segment. Let's kick off the show with some tech news and updates. I am Chukwuemeka Agbata, and this is Tech Trends.
Virtual reality is a technology that could actually allow you to connect on a real human level, soul to soul, regardless of where you are in the world. The COVID-19 pandemic is having its effect on the global economy, including the education sector, proving to many educational institutions, parents, and even students just how much technology can enhance the learning process. Although EdTech, that is, education technology, is nothing new, the concept has recently become a buzzword as various schools and educators latch on to e-learning platforms to help students have a more comprehensive learning process. The pandemic gave EdTech an upscale when most students were at home, but Oluwakoyejo Oluwatosin with his team were already ahead of the times.
The company was built on a robust engine called the Universal Test Engine, and that was my final year project in the university. So we're like 7 years ahead of our time. Why? Because when we developed the software, it was designed to help students take exams using computers, and that was in 2007. That was 7 years before JAMB went CBT. So we started selling that solution to schools, and we saw that schools were a little bit jittery about investing in education technology at that time.
With a goal to provide every Nigerian child with quality basic education at primary and secondary school levels, Chronicles Software Development Company made another unprecedented move in 2013.
We looked down the road, we needed to tell ourselves the truth, that there's going to be a time whereby learning devices will be the buzzword. So in 2013, we started the research. It took us 3 years in the offering. We started Success Star. Now the goal is to ensure that we empower every Nigerian child. When we launched the One Tablet for Every Child campaign, we empower every Nigerian child with digital learning devices, premium content, accessible to quality educators that will be able to position these children not just to excel in the exams, but to go on to become change agents in society. All the digital learning resources of the secondary school curriculum is digitized into the tablets. So everything a child needs to learn from JS1 to JS3 in accordance with the Nigerian curriculum is there. And we also ensure that schools can also digitize their own customized solutions into the device. So when you pick up the tablet, the beauty also is that those contents run 100% offline after the tablet has been activated.
With different ideas and digital platforms popping up to help bridge the education gap orchestrated by the pandemic, Oluwakoyejo says his company has also joined the trade.
Schools were locked down, children were at home. Now schools were looking for an avenue to extend remote learning or online learning as the case may be. So ULearn LMS enables any school owner to set up a digital school in minutes. When the lockdown happened, we saw it as an opportunity for us to launch the unified learning platform. So what does it do? It has your learning content, it has your testing content, it provides an analytic dashboard for parents and schools to be able to track learning outcomes. So the goal is for ULearn is to create a borderless classroom for students everywhere. So the goal is to ensure that students resume when schools are locked down, which we don't expect or want to happen. Or what if it happens again? Our goal is to ensure that that is not the case going forward.
Despite the technological challenges faced in the country, there's been a rise in the growth of EdTech startups who perhaps are changing the narrative. But how are we really faring?
We are still in the emerging phase as a country. So we've had it good, bad, and ugly. So the good is that, without the four walls of the classroom, learning can still happen. That has been really, really validated. Now, the bad is that not everybody has access to this kind of learning experiences. And that is troubling. It's just maybe about 10% or 15% of students that can really have the full-blown online experience. Then also, the ugly side is that we're still struggling with regulation, government regulation on how this could really be a pivotal part of learning. So when you bring technology into learning, and we need some high-level government approvals, we know that's going to happen very soon, such that we have online learning unrestricted, and before you know it, accredited and licensed.
With e-learning fast becoming a valuable alternative to physical classroom interactions, it could be safe to say that the attempt to online learning may be an opportunity to reshape the way education is perceived.
An Egyptian engineer has designed a remote control robot that can take PCR swabs from patients, restricting interaction and limiting exposure amid the coronavirus outbreak. Specializing in mechatronics, Mahmoud El-Khami designed his robot in an effort to help medical staff during the pandemic.
ده روبوت مالتي مخصص
First of all, this is a multitasked robot made for the coronavirus pandemic. It has several tasks, one of which is measuring or detecting those that are suspected to have coronavirus in public places, such as in malls, banks, or at airports. It is able to perform facial recognition of any person and measure their temperature. If the person is discovered to have a fever, then an alarm is set off.
After more than a month's work, his current prototype is able to measure temperatures, take PCR mouth swabs, recognize faces that aren't covered in masks, and advise people on proper health care. While his second prototype proved successful, El-Khami says a third version currently under works will be able to take no swabs, as well as more accurately mirror a doctor's hand movement.
طبعا بلس ان هو يقدر ياخد مسحة البصمة الجينية والمسحة البي سي.
Apart from that, of course, the robot is able to take the PCR swab instead of a doctor. For now, it can take it from the mouth, from the right side. In version 3, the later version, that is, using the master-slave technique, where the doctor will be able to move the robot's hand remotely.
بالظبط كأن هو اللي بيحرك ايده بالظبط تمام من على بعد طبعا.
El-Khami hopes that hospitals and clinics can make use of his invention, limiting interaction in what are usually dangerously condensed spaces. Apart from its use in hospitals, El-Khami's robot can also be used in malls, banks and airports to screen passers-by's temperature and advise those not wearing masks. As face coverings become the norm amid the coronavirus pandemic, Japanese startup Donut Robotics has developed an internet-connected smart mask that can transmit messages and translate from Japanese into 8 other languages. The white plastic C masks fits over standard face masks and connects via Bluetooth to a smartphone and tablet application that can transcribe speech into text messages, make calls, or amplify the mask wearer's voice.
It's hard to hear what customers at the cash register of supermarkets and convenience stores are saying because there are partitions to prevent droplets. By wearing this mask, it can improve these communications by transcribing the conversations on smartphones or delivering the sound of the voices.
Donut Robotics engineers came up with the idea for the mask as they searched for products to help the company survive the pandemic. When the coronavirus struck, it had just secured a contract to supply robot guides and translators to Tokyo's Haneda Airport, a product that faces an uncertain future after the collapse of air travel. Donut Robotics' first 5,000 C masks will be shipped to buyers in Japan starting in September, with Ono looking to sell in China, the United States and Europe too. There has been strong interest, he said.
We worked hard for years to develop a robot, and we have used that technology to create a product that responds to how the coronavirus has reshaped society.
Donut Robotics is aiming at a mass market that did not exist until a few months ago. One aim, he said, is to generate revenue from subscriber services offered via an app that users will download. Donut Robotics built a prototype connected mask within a month by adapting translation software developed for its robot and a mask design that one of the company's engineers created 4 years ago for a student project to interpret speech by mapping face muscles. Owner raised $260,000 for development by selling Donut Robotics shares through Japanese crowdfunding site Fundino. Tech tips for students taking online classes from home during the coronavirus pandemic. With most schools and colleges closed due to the coronavirus outbreak, there has been a shift from classroom teaching to online teaching. Remote learning is still new for many parents and students, but to make it a little bit easier, here are some tips for parents to help their kids succeed in their online classes. Familiarize yourself with the technology. Before you use the virtual classroom software tool, familiarize yourself with the basics of the technology. Try to log into the software early and get yourself comfortable with the features. Understanding of computers. Online learning requires a good laptop with a webcam and keyboard. Make sure your machine is up to date with an antivirus installed and remove any programs you don't use or run a disk cleanup. Find out your connection speed. You need to figure out how fast your internet is currently, and you can simply type internet speed test into a search engine or try speed test site. If your speed is much lower than what you're paying for, you may want to contact your internet service provider. Keep yourself muted when you're not talking. If you're attending a live lecture with other students, ensure to mute yourself when you're not talking. That way you don't interrupt your classmates with unwanted background information. Most video conferencing apps have a small icon that shows you when your microphone is muted. Unmute the microphone when you want to join the discussion. Be careful of web camera. Pay close attention to your laptop's webcam if you're attending a lecture. Use a web camera only if you need to. Otherwise, unplug or cover up your camera. This could help prevent webcam spying.
Next is my chat with the country manager of Avanti Communications, Jane Egatin Idehe. Stay with us. Jane, glad to have you on the show today.
And I'm happy to be on the show. I'm happy to be
Awesome.
back.
Awesome. So COVID-19, the world, and data connection, connectivity. What's your take?
Well, I say COVID-19, like we call it, is a pandemic, isn't it? It's induced its own health crisis, economic challenges. But in terms of data and the digital world and telecoms, it does have some pluses. Because I think one of the largest ways we have coped globally is using the digital. We have used the digital to cope. The fact that we could do online learning, the fact that even sometimes we could do e-health for cases where people couldn't go physically to the hospital. The fact that some companies and businesses and offices could pivot and go online to do their work or do webinars. I think that has been a coping mechanism. So if you look at it on a global trend, one of the ways we have coped for COVID-19 is using the digital or using the internet.
if we look at Nigeria today, would you say that we're on the right track with connectivity?
We still have a huge gap. Nigeria still, because even though we have a mobile penetration, I think about 50%, our internet usage is still very low. And that's what you're looking at. The reasons beyond the main cities people could not cope is because we didn't have access to the internet. So we have two big issues that we are really battling with. One is the fact that we don't have a lot of people connected, so we don't have a lot of connected users. And if you don't have connected users, that's a problem. Then you don't have a lot of people on the internet. So it was very difficult for a lot of, just look at the educational system. 80% of the schools are outside the cities and they couldn't be online. So we've shut down the schools for almost the whole year. Apart from the private schools that probably have some infrastructure, the government-owned schools, the public schools could not pivot. They don't have any online infrastructure. So that sector was hugely affected. Retail, entertainment, hugely affected. I would say is some of the SMEs that were online that could probably cope, and some of the multinationals already online, but a huge segment of our society could not cope. One of the things I was really proud of was, like, I think after the lockdown, like 2 or 3 months after, we saw a lot of states responding in terms of connectivity. They started reducing the right of way. Some of them stuck to the government rate of 145 naira. Others reduced it lower. Others actually gave it for free. But that has been in our plan for years and nobody did it. So COVID has actually forced us to act faster. It's like pushing us out to really address our digital or connectivity issue faster. That's one of the ways I would like to say that the fact that it's forcing us to do what we need to do.
So Jane, apart from the issues like right of way that you mentioned that, you know, some state governments fast tracked, what are some of the other thoughts or advice that you would have for the government?
So right away is key because of infrastructure, because definitely, like I said, the biggest thing is you have to create infrastructure. You have to create broadband infrastructure, and fiber was very key. And, you know, companies wouldn't want to go to areas where there's no, if the cost is too high, they wouldn't go. So that was one good way that, you know, we've addressed it. I think the second thing we need to do, we need to use policy as well. We need support, because one of the biggest gaps, if you read the Affordable Internet for All report for 2020 that just came out, one of the biggest gaps for Nigeria is devices. We don't have affordable devices. A huge part of the population does not have affordable devices or doesn't have access to it. We can look for ways to address that. You know, the duties, the clearance fees that companies that import these devices have to pay for could have been a barrier. Another thing is to also use our Investor Service Fund to also address that gap. Because if we make devices available, we would have more penetration. So we're solving two things. So we create the connectivity. We also make sure that the population is enabled.
Okay, you mentioned the digital divide. Any hope for the rural areas from the way things stand?
Well, the hope is difficult right now. I like to be optimistic, so I'm very optimistic. I wouldn't want to say like there's no hope, you know. There's a huge gap, even though Africa as a continent, you know, Africa as a continent, 70, even though we have about, I think about 34% of the population, you know, with access to mobile devices, only 16% of a 1.3 million population, 16 have access to the internet. So the digital divide is huge if you compare us to other regions. But the digital divide is not something you can address in one day. You know, COVID has just brought it to our attention at the forefront and made it a very urgent issue. But I don't think we can address it in one day, because even though we want to address connectivity, it's infrastructure, it's CapEx investment. You know, we're already having logistical challenges. We can't seem to bring, you know, the right goods, import them into the country. So to import the infrastructure, or, you know, deliver infrastructure with lockdowns and challenges like this is going to be very difficult. So the digital divide is not going to just go away a couple of months. There's no short-term solution to the problem. It's a lot of investment. It's going to take time, because you have to go to the rural areas, underserved areas. And it's not going to be a social impact kind of work. Most times social impact is long, and most times for things to be really sustainable, I think you need the private sector. There always has to be a commercial bearing. It makes it more sustainable. When people have a commercial reason to do something, it's more sustainable because it can be maintained. And most times when it's just social impact, like all those projects, we go there, we install the nodes and we disappear. Nobody maintains them. Nobody takes care of them. So it works for the first couple of months. And after that, the thing is no longer working because it's not sustainable. So that in terms of the models we use, it has to change. I think probably a private-public partnership will work because the private sector would always come with a commercial or business-driven incentive to make sure that it's sustainable. You just don't do it and walk away. So it's not going to be a short-term solution. I'm sorry about that, but I'm an optimist to say that let's put it now as an urgent issue to address.
Yeah. So how do you think the private sector can make economic sense of the rural areas that may not have the purchasing power that those in the urban areas have?
It's got to do with the way business is being done today with the private sector. We are looking for high returns. And when you're looking for high returns, the rural areas do not give you an attractive model. So I think, first of all, we have to change the models. There has to be a lot of collaborative effort between the public sector and the private sector. So when I mean change the models, the traditional model is that you want to look at your total cost of ownership from a certain angle. You put your cost and you must get your revenues that will cover your costs and give you the lovely EBITDA margins you think of. But maybe we have to change it in a way that, are there ways we could address that cost with a partnership? And some of those costs is like what we're saying, if the cost is too high, the right of way, the clearing fees for bringing equipment into the country, the licenses and permits you have to pay to put a site up, site acquisition. Is there a way we can collaborate with the government, with the public sector to reduce those fees so that for the rural areas, it makes it easier for the private sector to go in?
Finally, what do you expect from the industry post-COVID-19?
Post-COVID-19, so this is a wake-up call. It's like, it's been a wake-up call. Nigeria, wake up, you're far behind. Because I was looking at some stats. It says that we have 1% of our digital economy using digital services. 1%. So there's a whole 99% that is just wasting away. So what I would love to see post-COVID is a situation where my auntie in the village will be able to receive mobile money from me. And she could use that mobile money to trade, to pay her children's school fees. Where my grandmother in the village can receive e-health services because there's connectivity available in that village. Those are just trying to paint a picture of all the possibilities for Nigeria, because that is definitely creating the digital economy. And we cannot do that if we don't start now investing. We can talk about these nice, fancy ideas, but the only way is to start now. So today is our morning. Can we start now? Can we start investing in the infrastructure?
Jane, always a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on this show.
My guest has been Jane Egatin-Idehe, Country Manager, Avanti Communication. And as you heard from her, Africa needs to do a lot more to catch up with the rest of the world. Millions of Africans still don't have access, and with the global pandemic, the digital divide can only get wider if nothing is done. We've come to the end of the show, but it doesn't end here. The conversation continues online. We are Tech Trends TV on social media. Also watch the show on Channels TV YouTube or via cfablog.ng. For Tech Trends, I'm Chukwemeka Agbata.